Right, good. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us at this English Association discussion panel where we'll be hearing from contributors to our summer newsletter to talk about the power and pleasure of reading. I'm Becky, I'm the Chief Exec of the English Association. I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening, and huge thanks to our speakers for giving their time and their expertise so generously. We really do appreciate it. So I'm going to sort of step in the background now, and I will hand it over to my colleague, another Becky Smith, who's going to be hosting for us this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, it always feels funny when it's like, thanks, Becky. Hi, Becky. Thanks, Becky. Lovely to see everyone. Welcome. Feel free to pop any questions in the chat as you go through, but we will have sort of 15 minutes at the end where you can ask some questions of our speakers as well. So you can ask them as we go, but we'll have that designated time at the end as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us for this chat all about reading for pleasure. I think we'll start off, we'll just go around and introduce our speakers on the call. So guys, if you can introduce your name, your job, what your English Association article was about in the latest newsletter, and then if you can just give us a little bit of bio about covering your connection to the field of reading for pleasure. So if I get started, my name is Becky. I am one of the learning and participation managers at Cheltenham Festivals, with particular responsibility for the Literature Festival and the year-round outreach work we do at the Literature Festival and some of the schools programming for the festival as well. So I was the editor for the summer newsletter. So I was having all the conversations and bringing everyone together. So I don't have an article. I did the editorial at the beginning that framed it all for you. I was a primary school teacher and then moved into kind of theatre and festival outreach and ended up in this fabulous role where I get to talk about books all day with other people who also love books. So yes, it's a great privilege to be here. Debbie, I'm going to come to you next.
Hi, I'm Debbie Thacker. I'm an academic and I'm also on the evaluation team for Reading Teachers, Reading Pupils, which is why I'm connected with this program. And my PhD research was about children's literature. And from the article, you can probably tell, I'm very interested in that as looking at as part of a continuum of how we become readers and what we get out of reading, the pleasure and the power of that. I also ran a master's course in children's literature for a number of years, and I teach a course in children's literature in a program at Bath. So that's me.
Fabulous, thank you. And Debbie, your article was about Aidan Chambers' Tell Me approach, which we'll be talking about in great detail. So thank you. Jake, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Jake Hope. I'm a librarian by profession, although I'm not actually attached to a library any longer. I look after the Yoto Carnegie Awards, which are the UK's oldest children's book awards. There's a medal for illustration and there's a medal for writing. I grew up in Fleetwood, which is in the northwest of the UK. It's quite a deprived sort of old fishing town. And the library for me was a real sort of life-changing experience going there. And so my article for the English Association is about libraries and the ways that they can help to build reading cultures, really.
Fabulous, thank you. Chris, I'll come to you.
Hello, I'm Chris. I teach in Year 6. I lead reading across a multi-academy trust of 5 schools in Gloucester. And within that role, I'm also accountable for reading improvement across all 5 schools. And yeah, I got involved in the project and, just absolutely love everything to do with reading now. And I co-contributed with Kat, who will speak in a moment, and we put something together about practical uses for reading for pleasure in school.
Fabulous, thank you. And Kat, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Kat Wood. I am reading and phonics lead at Upton St Leonard's CAV Primary School, which is also in Gloucester and not that far from Chris's school, but very different kind of catchment, very different children. I'm currently teaching in Year 2, moving to Year 1 in September, having previously taught up in Key Stage 2, Year 5 and 6 for about 16, 17 years. I came into Reading Teachers about 4 years ago, and it's completely changed my school, completely changed my kind of outlook and career and things wise. And I, like Chris said, alongside Chris, helped to write an article to do with creating a reading culture in your school. Hopefully we'll be able to give you some things that you can take away today that are like little wins that will help improve your kind of reading for pleasure offer.
Thank you very much. So you'll notice that quite a few people mentioned RTRP, and that's kind of how we all have kind of come together and sort of know each other. Obviously, Jake was doing work with the festivals before I arrived as well. But I'll just give a kind of super quick introduction to the project for those who might not have heard of it or might not be that kind of familiar. So Reading Teachers equals Reading Pupils is many things, but one of the things is a national network of teachers' book groups who read high quality and diverse literature with the aim of igniting the spark of reading for pleasure in teachers and through them their pupils. So the project's been running since 2016. It initially started in Gloucestershire and then expanded rapidly kind of across the UK. We release 5 sort of RTRP champion books each year as of this year for lower Key Stage 2, upper Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. So if anyone's interested in kind of finding out more about joining an existing group or starting your own teachers book group, you know, using these books and the pedagogy that Debbie will talk about in a bit, then you can find out more at cheltenhamfestivals.com/RTRP. And if you're in Gloucestershire, because I don't know where everyone's from, if you're in Gloucestershire, you could also have a look at our RTRP Reading 4 course, which will be running this year. And again, you can find more information on our website or by emailing education@cheltenhamfestivals.com. With that out of the way, let's get into some information about these articles. Debbie, we're going to start with you. So your article was about the pedagogy of Aidan Chambers and the Tell Me approach, which is also the approach that we use in the RTRP programme. Could you start us off with a little bit more info about Aidan's work and the kind of Tell Me philosophy? So sort of what is it? Why does it work?
Okay, well, I think if anybody has come across Aidan Chambers, specifically the Tell Me book or Book Talk, which is one of his earlier collections, you'll know that they were written in the 90s, but they're still as relevant, probably even more relevant today. And choosing that as the kind of model for pedagogy is really important to why I think Reading Teachers and equals Reading Pupils works so well. The pedagogy is a way of talking about books together in a kind of non-hierarchical way. So instead of having the teacher be the authority about the book and know what kinds of answers they say, well, tell me about what you like, tell me about what you don't like, so that the pupils have that kind of agency to have their own readings and to come across the readings of other pupils, so that there isn't one specific meaning for a book. I mean, we've come quite a long way from a time when it was the author who ruled the world. We've been through, if you've studied literary theory, you know that we've been through the death of the author and that the meaning is made by the readers. Aidan's forays into reader response theory have given him this model. But also the recognition that the awareness of children, that the teacher is a co-reader, somebody who has their own readings and their own thoughts, and that you can enter into a conversation about that, gives you a feeling of power, whether you're the teacher or the pupil. And I think that's quite an astonishing feeling to have. It can be transformational. And you get enough out of the book from all the different readers than you would on your own. So reading for Aidan Chambers is a kind of community activity. And one of the things about Reading Teachers, Reading Pupils is that the book groups are little communities. Each one is a little community. And then the teachers go into their schools and create that community in the schools. So there's an understanding of how important meaning making is. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to have a kind of follow-up question to Chris and Kat, because you've participated in that kind of Tell Me book talk and you've done it with your pupils. Is there anything you can share about kind of the impact of that book talk on yourselves as readers or kind of on your pupils?
Do you want to start, Kat?
Yeah, you go.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, for me personally, I know Kat alluded to, like, it transformed her her teaching and her her pedagogy and everything, right? But it truly has for me too, because when I joined the program about 7 years ago from a sense of, I was given English to lead across in my school, and I definitely didn't feel of myself to be an English expert, and I didn't feel that I was, very up to date with current publications and current authors. So I saw the opportunity for the program, and then I signed up to it, and then that sort of got the ball rolling. It's had this enormous snowball effect on me, both personally and professionally. And then now I find myself, in a situation where I'm, leading reading across 5 schools, and it's all from the little spark about joining a reading teachers group that then, sharing pedagogies and practices and current publications and recommending authors and, practicing book talk as a collective. And, as Debbie said earlier, and, and taking that culture and ethos and taking it back into school and watching that grow in classrooms around you. And it's been completely transformational.
I think I can only echo what Chris has said, but what I think for me as well is, because over my time in Reading Teachers, I've made the move from Key Stage 2, which was a huge move, down to Key Stage 1. I like how you can take the approach with you. It's not something that is just necessarily for something for older children. I use it down in Year 1. I've used it in Year 2. I'm going to be doing some a reception book club after Christmas. I'm going to use that as well, because children want to talk about books, and this kind of non-hierarchical approach is just brilliant for our children. And I think that's what is so brilliant and so powerful, that it doesn't matter whether you're teaching in Year 1 or whether you're teaching in Year 6 or whether you're teaching in Year 13 with A-level English literature students. The principles are the same, and I think it allows children, and the national curriculum and being a primary school teacher is very tight. We spend a lot of time being told what to teach. That what the approach allows you to do is, and allows the children to do, is to really express themselves very freely, and children love to talk, and they particularly like to talk about books that they enjoy, and it just creates that passion and that love of reading that we know is just so important.
Thank you. And I'll just add a little bit to that about kind of the model. So the way we kind of frame it in a really simple way is to look at likes, dislikes, puzzles, and patterns. Those are the kind of key things that we hit on. We're actually going to be creating some additional resources for our website, some videos of teachers doing book talk, which anyone would be welcome to access. They won't be up until the autumn now, but if you check out the website, there will be some videos there showing, I think they're the 3 enthusiasms when Aidan talks about them, aren't they, Debbie? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the likes, the dislikes, and then the puzzles, so what questions you have about the book, and then the patterns, so links to other books, links to real life, and links within the novel as well. It's just a really simple but effective way of framing that talk. And then we go on to talk about hooks and outputs. So how would we introduce this to readers in a kind of engaging way, and then what creative outputs, either writing or cross-curricular or otherwise, might come out of it. So it's kind of like it's one of those things, there's so much theory around it that you could read, which is fascinating, that proves why it works, but you can also kind of drill it down, because we know we're all time poor in the classroom. You don't have a lot of time to be doing those deep dives. That template will also be available on our website soon as well, and you can just or look it up. But likes, dislikes, puzzles, and patterns is kind of the key takeaway there. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to come over to Jake now. So your article in the newsletter was about working with libraries, as you mentioned earlier, both school libraries and public libraries. So I guess my question is, why is it so impactful for teachers and librarians to sort of work together when it comes to promoting reading for pleasure? Why is the library so important?
Thanks, Becky. That's a really good question. And I think already we're starting to see some kind of threads beginning to come through in what people are discussing. And for me, it's all about conversations and connections. And I think libraries, often they're seen as rooms of books, but actually they're all about connections. They're about how we connect with the world, with big ideas, with other people's writing, with our own imaginations. I'm going to start by being a bit of a pedant and being a little bit polemical, because I think it's important that we kind of understand what reading for pleasure is. And it can sometimes be a slippery one to define, because it can present itself in many different ways. Debbie opened up by talking about sort of non-hierarchical reading. And I think the idea of the death of the author and the birth of the reader is really important. Things that are reader-led, something that we do for our own intent and motivations, whether those be about escapism, whether they're about discovery and curiosity, to know, as C.S. Lewis said in the film Shadowlands, to read to know that we're not alone, to better understand and empathize with others, sometimes to challenge ourselves, but equally sometimes to comfort ourselves. And it isn't about literacy levels, oracy, or attainment, though if we get it right, it can impact positively upon all of those things. I think the joy for me in libraries is that libraries can prepare us to become independent and lifelong learners. They help us to become curious individuals with the skills and abilities to find out more for ourselves. And I think that is a huge, huge life skill that we're always able to carry with us. And I think one of the challenges for libraries now is to try to reframe reading as being an activity that's social and creative. When we talk about reading, we often talk about bookworms, or we talk about being quiet or isolated. It doesn't have to be any of these things. It can be really dynamic. It can be exciting. It can be about those conversations, the enthusiasm. And why is it impactful when teachers and librarians come together? Well, I think we're working with one another's skill sets and expertise. We're providing a consistent message about reading, and that critical mass is hugely important. If we can all come together and provide that single message, I think that's hugely powerful. And the library is a neutral space. It's a sanctuary. It's a physical area where people can browse. And one of the things that we're finding in libraries an awful lot is actually people aren't confident in browsing now. And I think that's only got worse since the pandemic and since lockdown. And there is something wonderful in that serendipity of discovering the right book for us at exactly the right time. And I think the key thing really with libraries and sort of teachers coming together is that we can travel further together than we ever could individually and in isolation. And yeah, what Chris spoke about the difficulty and the challenge in keeping up to date, I think that's a real issue, navigating through roughly 10,000 children's books that are published annually in the UK. That is a huge task and it's unmanageable. Actually, librarians are doing this day to day as their jobs, and you can tie in and lock in with their skill sets, and you can take part in some really fun sort of activity as well. Things like Summer Reading Challenge, which happens across the 6 weeks of the holiday, the Carnegie Shadowing. There are some really exciting opportunities there. So I think, yeah, I would urge everyone to make those connections and to travel further than you can individually.
Thank you. I'm going to have a follow-up with Debbie, because you've spoken to some teachers and librarians who have kind of been working together in RTRP. Can you kind of add anything to that about kind of the impact of the relationship when it works well? What impact do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the, I think what Jake said is exactly to the point, but I think there's also that sense that librarians are readers. They're readers who have, when you talk about patterns, they will know what to read next. And so it's important that they're readers. And very often in schools, there are no librarians, or there's a librarian there for 2 days a week, or a librarian who does about 10 other things besides being in the library, but they're trained to work with books. And I think one of the things that I found talking to librarian and teacher pairs who've been going to the book groups is it's really changed their view of themselves in the school, and the view of, for instance, the English department in a secondary school, who look now to the librarian to help them to structure the reading culture around the school, rather than be two separate things. They work together, they do projects together and talk to each other. For instance, I was in a school last week where the year sixes were coming into secondary school, and they spent an hour in the library. They'd been talking to the English lead who was there, and the librarian and the English lead were doing the session together, so that the children who are coming in associate the library with reading in all its forms, rather than a place that you go to when it's raining and you can't play football. So I mean, I think it's the value of two working together, but it's also that kind of personal sense of agency for the librarians that what they've been trained for, they get to really engage in. And so there's a great deal of enthusiasm for that pairing.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This question is sort of for everyone, so we'll kind of take it in turns. But if a teacher came up to you, or a parent or carer came up to you and said, you know, and this is a big question, how do I encourage my child or my pupils to read for pleasure? What are the kind of key things that you would say, you know, and then feel free to give examples of what's worked for your schools, or schools that you've worked with. Let's go to Jake first. I'll pounce on Jake first.
Thank you. I was really struck by Debbie's comment there about the word associate. And I think positive associations are so key in all of this. I have to admit, and luckily my camera isn't showing this, but I hate housework. I really, really struggle to do my housework, and it's just a chore. If we build things as being a chore, if they're hard work, we're not really going to want to do them. I can do my housework by listening to an audiobook. That's the only way that I can kind of make myself do it. And I think that positive association is something that we really need to encourage and support. If we make things feel like work, we won't want to do it. But if we can encourage reading by stealth and create positive associations through that, I think that has to be a really positive thing. And sometimes that may not feel like what we recognize as traditional reading. So it may be that we're game playing and we're looking at top trump cards or Monopoly, which are actually quite word rich. It may be that we're encouraging other hobbies like cooking and crafts, which have recipes or instructions that need to be followed. So there are many different ways of encouraging reading and keeping those skills up without necessarily making it all about the reading. And I think that positive association, something that we want to do, that we're enjoying doing, and that we're feeling rewarded in doing, is hugely important.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? Debbie, go first.
I mean, I think anything you can do to take success and failure away from the act of reading. I mean, if in the article I talked about a boy that I worked with in my research who just thought about reading as a success or failure thing. What level am I on? Am I a free reader yet? You know, all those kinds of things. And that's going to pull somebody away from even trying to read. But things that, you know, as Jake's saying, you can associate with fun or pleasure. One of the things that's interesting about doing reading teachers and reading pupils is that at the beginning of every session, the book is wrapped up in newspaper and people are made to guess what the book might be, and then it's revealed. Now, a lot of the teachers took that back into the classroom. The fact that the teacher was in a book group and talking about books, and then the children got the chance to play that game, the same as the teachers were doing, was extremely powerful. And you could see children reacting to that in the classroom, that, you know, wow, you're in a book group. You know, what are you talking about? When's the next book coming out? It became a kind of game. And I think all those kinds of things are important. I think the final thing I would say is read aloud. Everybody likes to be read aloud to, and that's so important. But it also takes away from, I mean, I think people think, oh, if you read aloud, they're not reading for themselves, they're not learning the skills. But I think they do. They learn the voice that you need, a storytelling voice, and I hear the voices of the authors coming through the teacher's mouth. So I think it's, you know, reading aloud is really important. That's my thoughts.
Just to, before I come to you, Chris, just to back up what Debbie's saying about the reading aloud, we had a teacher this year who, one of our books this year for Key Stage 3 was The Climbers by Keith Gray. And she was talking about how, I think it was, I can't remember if it was the librarian or the teacher, because they were working as a pair, but one of them had taken the class outside under a tree and read the book aloud to them. And she said the response was huge compared to reading other books in the classroom. Being outside under a tree when you're reading The Climbers, which is obviously all about trees, for those who don't know, probably could have guessed, you know, that immersion and that reading aloud and the kind of joy and connection of that. She said children were coming up to her and saying it was the best lesson ever. So yeah, just to back that up. Chris, I will come to you.
So it's drawing upon what both Jake and Debbie said, is because it's often a question that we get asked/probed about at parents' meetings and parent consultations, is that I can't get them to read. And then it's almost sometimes comes across as, and what are you going to do about that, as like a lingering in the air. So rather than have, you know, parents and teachers that were both desperate for the same thing, what we've created is a community book group. So whereby we have as a teacher and someone that enjoys reading, we understand the importance of a reading role model, and, you know, showing that reading is a good use of time, and, you know, it's not that the telly is off and we are reading, and all those things that, you know, we all do on this call. But then it's so important, you can't then just say that to the parent and create a really frosty atmosphere. So we created a community book group where we emulate what is, you know, reading teachers. We meet once a term and we share a book and we discuss it around, but it's not an expectation, but it's always very much a thank you so much to all the adults that have read this as well. And the adults and children both share that reading experience, either by, you know, they read a chapter each out loud, as in, you know, old-fashioned bedtime story style, or, you know, if they're a little bit older, then they read the book and then the adult reads after, and they discuss before coming to the meeting. And from that, it's, again, like Jake's about, creating the positivity and positive culture and the association with reading being a positive to these children's lives. And then adults, or as, you know, as Catherine Rundle's short essay book, you know, said, you as an adult, you re-find that your spark and your love for reading children's literature that you wouldn't necessarily do unless you work in children's education or something to do with, you know, children's books published in libraries, for example. So by creating that community culture has started to really, you know, change our settings, whereby people feel safe reading, they enjoy reading, and it starts to build that culture with parents, you know, not parents and teachers not holding each other to account, but working together for the good of the child in the centre of it.
Mine, I suppose, is a little bit similar to Chris is saying. We do something down in Key Stage 1, so I'm very passionate about getting it right. I think it's so important we get this right, create this kind of reading culture from the moment our children walk in, so from our stay and play sessions, from our nursery transition. I think it is just so important. So we have something called travelling story sacks, which are drawstring bags with a teddy bear, a children's picture book, a chocolatey treat and a hot chocolate sachet, and it goes home every week. And it kind of, again, is making that positive association. It's about that adult-child interaction with a book. We ask our parents then to share it on our socials, and it's a really popular thing. So then, and I think we talk about the death of a bedtime story. You look at some of the research that children aren't read to, and children, if we put that kind of that lovely treat, that lovely experience, oh, I've got the travelling story sack, and they run out of school, and this is the second time I've had it, and they name the teddies, and they share it with older siblings. And I just think it's right from day one, as soon as they walk in through our doors, that they understand that reading is something to be cherished and to be celebrated and to be enjoyed. And yes, we're going to teach you phonics, and yes, we're going to talk about at some point the dreaded Key Stage 2 reading sats. But right now, you've just got a lovely book, a really nice treat, and you're just going to enjoy this book with an adult or an older sibling. And that time's kind of precious and sacred. And that's hugely popular. So we do that from reception to year 2.
Pat, could you talk a little bit more about your school? Because you've got quite a lot of things that you do that are kind of, that I feel like a lot of schools might not have thought of, or you know, from the vending machines to the reading sheds and all that kind of stuff. Give us a little bit more.
I always start by saying this has been my kind of labour of love, my baby, for the last 3 or 4 years. This is not something I've done in an academic year. It's kind of been progressive. I felt that when I became reading lead, we did reading for pleasure was a tick box exercise, and I think children see through that. World Book Day was just something else to tick off the list in the school calendar. I don't think there was any understanding about promoting a love of reading. We had lots of Elsas and football kits, and we didn't ever read. We might have just spent 10 minutes reading and filling in a worksheet, but we never actually did anything meaningful. So we kind of started with things like, we started with a literature festival at Upton St Leonard's Literature Festival, where I basically relentlessly tweeted authors and emailed authors until they agreed to come and speak at my school. We've had Vashti Hardy, we've had Angelique Rafe, we've had lots of the authors from the Reading Teachers, Reading Pupils books. We've had Zooms with kind of Kieran Loud, we've had Zooms with Ross Mackenzie. Lots of authors out there want to get involved. They want to be part of it. You know, we're the gateway to their target audience. So they do a huge amount of things. If you're not on Twitter, I know can be a bit of a kind of scary place, but there's a lot of good on Twitter. There's a lot of authors out there who do a huge amount of promotion, and they want to get into your classrooms, and they want to share with you, and they want you to share with them. That's now kind of evolved, and it's self-funded. Parents pay a couple of pounds every year at the start of the year, and it's valued. We go to the Cheltenham Literature Festival every year. It's the first school trip that our year 1 children go on, and our year 1s to year 6s go, and it's a really, and all we have governors come along and support it. My head teacher always comes to a visit. That's really important. We've got a vending machine. So all our prizes, any kind of reward in our school is book linked. If it's somebody's birthday, rather than bring sweets in, we ask them to bring a book in, because you're probably going to spend £5 on bags of Haribo or other branded sweets that are available. Buy a £5 book that can go in the book corner. The vending machine, you earn points throughout the year. We have hot chocolate. One of our favourite prizes is hot chocolate with the deputy head. So again, it's about a hot chocolate and a story. So he shares his story, and he always reads George's Marvellous Medicine because it's his favourite, and he absolutely loves it. And the children really love that. Reading buddies. We have reading ambassadors in Key Stage 2 who are champions of reading. They help run the library. They help promote reading throughout the school. And then we have kind of reading stars in Key Stage 1 who are like apprentice reading ambassadors, who are kind of learning the ropes from the year 6s, which is really lovely. I'm trying to think. We do lots and lots. But like I said, it hasn't been an instant. It's been slow. We also do a community book group, which Chris inspired me to do. Some weeks I get 15, 20 parents. Other times I get 5, but I always share the books on our social media. So I know they might not have come to the meeting, but maybe they've bought the book and read the book. So that's great. But it's just like little things that you can do just to make it genuine and authentic, and just say this is what our school stands for, this is what our values are, and one of those is a love of reading. So
thank you. I think if there's one thing I've learned from Kat, it's the relentlessness that you have to sort of approach it with if you want to make that kind of whole school change. It really is just like chipping away over years and years and years, and eventually you get there. Thank you. Fabulous. Jake, I'm going to come over to you, and I'm just wondering if someone really doesn't have a clue where to start in terms of keeping up to date with the best in children's literature, would you have any advice for them in terms of where to look, or do you have any kind of recommendations? Obviously there's the Carnegie lists, but is there anything else you can think of? And I apologize, I haven't prepped this question in advance. I'm just jumping.
No, absolutely fine. Yeah, so the Carnegie lists are a good kind of place to have a look. There are, usually around about 20 books on the illustration long list, 20 books on the writing long list, and then they get whittled down to round about 8 for each award on the short lists. Alongside that, I think Book Trust do some fantastic work. If you don't follow Book Trust social media, or indeed their website, is well worth doing that. They produce a great books guide every year as well, which highlights some of the books that they think in that year are really noteworthy. And they have all kinds of people feeding into that process. So it's not one person's tastes or likes, it's a whole kind of consensus. So I think that's really useful. The English Association's Picture Book Awards, I think, are a really good way of keeping up to date with some of the picture books. And I think it's really important too to say that picture books aren't just stepping stones towards learning to read. We can continue using those right through. When we're talking about reading, sometimes it's very easy to see it as something that's sequential. But as I said at the beginning, I think sometimes we want to be challenged, sometimes we want to be comforted. And as with a balanced diet, we need a balanced reading diet as well. And at times our needs and nutritional needs are different. So yeah, and then I would say if you've got specific kind of needs, so it may be that you've got a child who's facing very specific individual circumstances, then yeah, take a trip to your local library, speak to the librarian there. They will be able to recommend some really good quality books that are going to lead to those discussions and that are going to be conversation starters.
Thank you. And to add to that, just to say that the Reading Teachers Reading Pupils group, which obviously we've talked about a lot, because that, like I said, that's how we all kind of know each other and come together. But we previously, you had to kind of be in the groups to reveal those, to find out what those books were one-on-one throughout the year. But for next academic year, we're actually going to be opening it up to anyone. So even if you don't want to be in an RTRB group, you can still find out what those books are. So there'll be 5 for lower Key Stage 2, 5 for upper Key Stage 2 and 5 for Key Stage 3. And those books are chosen by kind of expert panels. Jake very kindly sat on our panels last week. So we know, Jake and I know what the books are, and it's sort of still a secret. We haven't released the news yet. But people from Book Trust as well, from CLPE, from the English and Media Centre, from Reading Zone, from all kinds of kind of places where you can find out about books. We've gathered some of those best people together to choose our shortlist for this year. And of those 5, so like I said, lower Key Stage 2, upper Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, 3 books will be contemporary, so published in the last 2 years, so you're keeping up to date with those kind of, contemporary books. 1 will be an Anytime, which this year was a kind of pre-2000 book, so you have that kind of comparison of writing styles. And then 1 is a picture book or graphic novel. If Debbie were here, she'd talk about how much Aidan loves picture books and promotes picture books as a brilliant way of having that kind of rich book talk, and kind of that promotes that critical thinking, because I think we probably all read a picture book and gone, I don't really know what that was about. That sense of like, there was some beautiful pictures, but I'm not sure I know how to talk about that. And that's kind of a great place to start when it comes to the book talk. It's very easy to talk about a book that we all loved, because we can all, gush about how marvelous it was and all the sentences and the vocab and everything. But when it's a book that's maybe a bit trickier, that actually often prompts the best kind of conversation. So yeah, Aidan writes a lot about, if you're interested in Aidan Chambers, he does write a lot about picture books and the kind of the benefits of talking about them. And with those 5 as well, over the next year, we'll be opening this up to any teachers. We'll be doing, for the 5 books for each key stage, we'll be doing 1 author webinar, 1 Q&A with an author. So you can, sign your pupils up to come along to the author webinar, which will be kind of within the school day. Send your questions in for the author Q&A. We'll be doing a creative writing challenge for 1 of the 5 books for each key stage, and we'll be doing an additional classroom resource. So we'll be working with CLPE for lower and upper Key Stage 2 and the English and Media Centre for Key Stage 3 to produce classroom resources on 1 of the books as well. So if it's a particularly tricky text that we think you could do with a bit of guidance, a bit of scaffolding, we're going to provide that. And the 5th one is, off the top of my head, what have I missed? Author webinar, Q&A. Oh, we'll do a Tell Me book talk session for anyone to join online. So if you're interested, if there's a particular one of the books, if you're interested in coming along, and it can be a nice tester for if you're interested in kind of joining a teacher's book group, or not, you can just come along and join the book talk, which will be a similar session to this, but we'll be talking about that specific book, again, 1 for each key stage. So keep an eye out for all that stuff, because like I said, that's going to be available for anyone, EA teachers, all teachers anywhere, so do spread the word. We've come to the end of our sort of questions. I don't know if any, Jake or Chris or Kat, is there anything else you want to say before we kind of launch into questions about your experiences with Reading for Pleasure, promoting Reading for Pleasure, anything else that you want to add that we haven't covered?
I've got just one thing, which is building on Debbie's point about the language that we use and talking about non-readers and reluctant readers. I think it is really, really important that we move away from this. In mental health, when you look at the history of mental health, the way that we used to talk about mental health is vastly different to how we talk about it now. And I hope we're going to see a similar sea change happen in terms of reading, where we talk about reading less confident readers, and we talk about readers who are developing their skills more, because all of us are actually readers. We all read different situations that face us. We all read pictures and images. And, you know, visual literacy is such a key part of our lives now. So I think it's important that, again, for that positive association, we recognise we are readers. It's not something that's up here, it's something we're already doing and that we can build and grow upon.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like we talk, don't we? We kind of preach about like growth mindset and not kind of having these fixed ideas and that sense of like, oh, I'm just not good at that yet, rather than I'm not just good at that. But actually, when we put those labels, we're kind of forcing them into that kind of fixed mindset. That's a really good point. Any questions then? So feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you want to come off mic and ask a question, we don't bite. So please feel free. If not, I'll just give everyone a sec to type a question if they're going to. Never tell if people are typing or if they're just waiting.
Can I ask a question for Chris and Kat? Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Because I'd be really interested on a very practical level about a text that you found to be really tried and tested and that has made a real difference in your classroom setting, something that you'd really recommend to other people.
Oh, the thing is, we only got 15 minutes left, Jake. That's the problem. It's one of those things that you know, particularly with the text, the extracts, and the full novels that we use on our curriculum. That's one thing that I was going to, you know, allude to, but it's the importance of the curriculum and, you know, reading for pleasure not being a bolt on. The curriculum is, you know, showing a window into reading for pleasure and does model reading for pleasure, and that's in it doesn't come after school, it doesn't come in, you know, at 3:10 each day. It is through everything that you do with reading. But there are just so many texts. Like this year, the children have absolutely adored When the Sky Falls by Phil Earle. That's been a real success. The children absolutely in year 5 have gone wild for Evelyn Jones by Phil Hicks. They found that one like just gripping, and the mystery, the writing that you get from it, the use of the slow reveal, and we're not going to save that chapter for tomorrow, and all of those reading aloud strategies. They've gone crazy for that. Year 4 have been, I don't know, more content. That's why I'm quite interested in the year 3-4 group for reading teachers next year, because the ones that I thought that they'd adore, like Lisa Thompson, kind of, they haven't bit as much as I thought they were going to, and they've really enjoyed, you know, like real classic Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe kind of classic, because we do our reading spine based around Doug Lemov's theory of the 5 plagues of the developing reader. So there's one strategically chosen, I like with the reading teachers group, one strategically chosen classic, so it challenges vocabulary and, you know, social norms of society and history and things like that. And then year 3 they really disliked the one that I thought that their flagship one that I thought with Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, but they've enjoyed other texts. So it's just constantly evolving. And then, you know, by having the 5 schools and making sure that we get all children to do surveys and questionnaires at the end, then we're now in the process of that worked really well. We're keeping this one. Let's, you know, flip this one up, and so making sure that we've got you know, representation and you know, really good journey through reading for all of our children, for, you know, windows, mirrors and sliding glass doors, but then also books that are, you know, rubber stamped by the children themselves in previous years, not just what we think that they would like. So constantly evolving, and that hence why it's so important to keep on top of, you know, modern contemporary publications.
For me, the one that I think is always never fails to kind of to get a reaction is The Boy at the Back of the Class by Angelique Rafe. We use that in year 4. It's powerful on so many different levels, but what I really love on it is so accessible. It's such a great storyline that grips you all the way to the end, and it challenges lots of things around gender and perceptions, and the children don't even realize that. They're just caught up with this trip to Buckingham Palace and this trying to keep the gates open, and we just every year the children really just run with it and they just love it. And we were lucky enough to have Angeli in school, and she's just somebody that you could just listen to I could listen to her talk every day and never got bored of what she says. She's so interesting, and she has a way of really inspiring us. And we're a CFE school, and our children quite often we talk about charity and things like that, and our values of love of one another. And that's particularly why that book's so important to us, because it's a love of one another, which I think is really important. So yeah, for us, our reading curriculum is predominantly looking at developing diversity, a love of one another. We are a 90% white British school, and we just want to show the world to our children.
Couldn't get myself off mute then. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, it's so hard to make a decision on those books. There are so many that teachers just absolutely adore. But I do think that often it's the books that maybe some people love. It's those Marmite books that actually often promote the best kind of conversation. And it's interesting, you know, the teachers reading groups, and I'm thinking of a specific book that we did this year for Key Stage 2, where the teachers group didn't really like the book. It wasn't they weren't huge fans. They had, you know, lots of things that they could kind of unpick about it. But then when they introduced it to the children absolutely loved it and like ran with it and were really kind of inspired by it. And it just goes to show that sometimes we have to sometimes remember that, like, with adults reading children's books, and they have a very different perspective, and we have to try and put ourselves back in the kind of shoes of those 10-year-olds and think about, well, actually, if I was 10, you know, this does have a very childlike voice, but I might like that because that's my voice as a 10-year-old. We've got some questions in the group, which we will endeavour to answer. From a Key Stage 3-4 perspective, are there any suggestions as to how we can include subjects other than English in promoting reading for pleasure? I mean, I think part of that will come down to like working with the library again. I mean, in terms of, you know, the librarians have access to, you know, those books for topics, you know, those books across all different historical time periods and all those great, you know, they might be able to recommend some fantastic narrative non-fiction about a particular geographical thing. You know, I might be clutching straws there a little bit, but I think your librarian might be your kind of best place to start. I mean, we certainly talk with the book talk. You don't have to be an English specialist to do the book talk. You know, you can definitely, any book that you're studying, you can apply the likes, dislikes, puzzles, patterns model to, and have that non-hierarchical book talk about, you know, whatever you're looking at in that topic. And the second thing that's come up about tutorial sessions, using tutorial sessions to encourage reading for pleasure. We hear that quite a lot from our secondary teachers actually in our group, that, you know, they really want to get their tutors reading. And how do you, you know, a lot of our teachers have kind of led CPD sessions in school on kind of the book talk, so that tutors feel more confident talking about it. Because if you're a math specialist, or you're a science specialist, or you're a, I don't know, DT specialist, you're not necessarily a reading specialist. And I think that, as Chris was saying, when he started the program, you know, you didn't have a sense of being really confident as a reader. And, you know, that's why talking about the books and building that kind of knowledge of high quality and diverse books, building that confidence in terms of talking about books over time, is really the only way to, you know, to turn teachers into readers. Because, you know, ultimately the reason we call it RTRP is that sense of, you know, until teachers are inspired and teachers feel like they have a kind of vested interest in the books and an enthusiasm for the books, you're never going to get that buy-in from the students, because they can tell, can't they, when you they can so tell when you don't really like a book, or you don't really know the book that well, or, you know, they really pick up on that energy. So I think the more you kind of put into having those conversations about the books and kind of promoting that book talk across, you know, the whole school, the greater impact it has. I think something that I think Kat might add to this, but I think you were saying that you kind of become known as like the book teacher, or like the reading teacher, and then it sort of cascades from there. And, you know, other pupils from other classes will find out, oh, well, I need a book recommendation, I'll go to that teacher. And I don't think in secondary that has to be the English teacher. If you've got a brilliant librarian or a brilliant maths teacher who absolutely loves books, you know, as long as it's someone in that kind of position where they can be a role model. Kat, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm in the fortunate position. I've got a almost 16-year-old daughter, and have seen some of the ideas and things that her school have used. Teenagers are notoriously difficult to kind of capture in terms of reading, and I remember I talk about, I used to read Sweet Valley High as a teenager, which I look back now, and my mum hated it because they're not particularly well written. They didn't particularly kind of stimulate me, but gosh, I read every single one. My daughter is 16, she really reads Colleen Hoover. They're not my books, they're not my genre, but she loves them. So I think that I've seen done, and I thought done really well, is they do things like in tutor time, it's like speed dating with books. So you wrap books up and you put like little kind of tags on them with just a very, very, very brief synopsis, and then you run around the table and you've got 30 seconds to decide whether you want to read that book, and just kind of gimmicky things like blind date, kind of those kind of things. So would you want to read this book, and these kind of the ideas. I think teenagers, they want to kind of find their own way a little bit, I suppose, and so just things that you can just do that, like I said, a little bit gimmicky, a little bit fun, a little bit silly, like things like TikTok and ideas and things you can do through that, trying to get them on their level, on their kind of medium, I suppose. Like World Cup of books, there's a really nice one I've seen done where they do World Cup and they have knockouts of each book, and again, it's just other ways of trying to kind of get them in when you're trying to compete against TikTok and Snapchat and all the other Be Real things that teenagers enjoy so much.
Thanks. Yeah, and I, you probably are all aware of it, but BookTok is kind of blowing up still, isn't it? In terms of, a lot of teenagers are getting their recommendations from BookTok. So if you can kind of find out what's there, and it's sometimes those books aren't the highest quality, but ultimately, they can be gateway books into harder books, into more complicated books that they're gonna, really learn and grow and hopefully, transform through. Gemma's popped in the chat. Do you know when the dates for RTRP 23-24 will be released? So there aren't specific dates, in the sense that if you want to become an independent partner, and then we basically provide you with a load of guidance for how to do it, and then you kind of go away and set up your group independently, as it were. So you don't need to kind of give us your dates or anything, you can kind of set them. We give you the book list, we give you guidance, we give you some training on the pedagogy, and kind of say, here's everything you could possibly need, have at it. And we're also there if you need any support or want any kind of further information about how to run the group. So yeah, if you're interested, please do drop me an email. I'll give you my email address. In fact, I'll pop my email address in the chat. It's just rebecca.smith@cheltenhamfestivals.com. She says very slowly while typing. So if anyone wants to drop me an email about RTRP, you're very welcome to, or even if anyone just wants to drop me an email about great book recommendations or reading for pleasure, I'm always happy to have a chat. Any more questions then? We've got a few more minutes. Is there any dialogue about the negative stigma surrounding being a reader within the student body, and how can we work against this? So if you've got a culture where being a reader is not seen as something positive, how do we kind of work against that? Does anyone want to kind of kick off an answer to that? Where would you start?
That's a really tricky one, but particularly, I know it's probably more a secondary based question, but specifically at primary school, it's about just challenging that head on, gathering gathering your allies and making sure that you stand firm and say, no, this is a pleasurable thing, this is a cool thing to do. Look at, come if you don't believe me, come and join our reading group, come and just give it a go once. I'll change, we will collectively change your mind. The children, they'll once you've got a book culture, they'll talk about it on the playground, and then they can't, you're always going to have that small little group of, usually the year 6 cool footballer boys, and they don't want anything to do with that. But if, again, if you've got this as like a satellite and it happens outside of, at lunch times and after school, but then your curriculum is driven through reading for pleasure, that is something that is not an opt-in or opt-out, and they can see that reading can be a pleasurable thing because we enjoy this collectively as a class every single day, then that can start to break down those barriers. So I say curriculum designs for me is absolutely imperative to that.
I think thinking about it might be secondary is promoting all your teachers as readers. I think in secondary there's this idea that you kind of put yourself in a box, so you can't be sporty and a reader. You can't be, it's those kind of things. So I think it's things like I've seen in secondary schools where they put things on their door, get your PE lead to do a reading assembly and talk about what they read in the as you go around and on office doors. I am reading, this is what I'm reading, so everybody's a reader. You can be you might have science teachers who absolutely love historical fiction, or you might have people that you might have PE teachers that like a romance novel and all these kind of things. And I think that's really important to challenge that. I think teenagers feel they want to fit in, and they want to be, I don't necessarily, if they can see that you can be both. You can be a reader, you can be sporty, you can like history, you can like science, you know, you can be amazing at football, you can also be somebody that enjoys reading, be amazing at reading. So I think maybe it's that everybody's a reader, and getting the people that you least expect to, you think, like I said, I'm sorry, PE teachers, that you almost make the assumption that they're not readers, and it's challenging those stereotypes and those assumptions that people have.
And I think that's the benefit of kind of coming at it from a reading for pleasure angle, is that often in secondary, you know, and you didn't actually specify secondary, but we're just assuming, you know, at secondary, there's so many set texts, aren't there? There's so much that you have to do, so many books you have to read. It's finding the balance between those texts that they have to do for the exams and the reading for pleasure element, and how do you fit those in? And Tutor Time's a great example, but those book clubs, you know, I know one teacher started a book club with a couple of kids who were interested, and really it was those kids, you know, just those couple of interested kids, and then it kind of spread a little bit, and then it kind of spread a little bit, and then suddenly there were like 80 kids, you know, in a book club, and there were like 6 book clubs having to run to so I think it is partly that word of mouth that's spreading, and like someone was just saying, it's that, you know, partly get the teachers on board. You know, we very strongly, you know, believe, and there is evidence to show that reading teachers do equal reading pupils in the long term, and that it is a case of like chipping away slowly at that culture and not kind of losing like the you know, not losing sight of the kind of end goal, even if it feels frustrating. Does it take away from the pleasure aspect of something we're expecting of students? I think it's all about how you frame it. I think if you're inviting them to voluntarily come to a book club, that's not really expecting anything of them. I think the difficulty in secondary is more those set texts, and there is an element there, isn't there, of, you know, if I have to study this for an exam, I'm probably not going to feel about it the same way as if I read a book, you know, with my tutor or with a teacher I have a great rapport with, or in a book club that I've chosen to go to. You know, I think creating the right environment for the children to read those books. I mean, we really believe that, like, you know, the right book at the right time in the right hands, you know, will kind of have that kind of you know, amazing impact. And I know Kat had a student, didn't you, with the Nowhere Emporium, who was not a reader at all, and to use that, you know, the label, the kind of reluctant reader that Jake was talking about, you know, he was, and ultimately the Nowhere Emporium and having an interaction with Ross Mackenzie, you know, set him on a brand new path, and now he kind of comes back from secondary school still to talk to Kat at primary and say, oh, what are you reading now? Or, oh, I've got this recommendation. So I think it is that chipping away, and all that kind of, that people have touched on, that positive reinforcement really, and not setting it up as something that is expected. Because you're right, if you kind of hammer the book down someone's throat, they're not going to enjoy it. It's about how do you build that excitement and kind of meet them on their level. And I think the RTRP model, the kind of Aidan Chambers non-hierarchical approach, is a really lovely approach because it enables students to feel empowered. It's not me as the teacher saying, you should read this book because I think it's really good and I think you'd enjoy it. It's saying, let's explore this book together. I don't like this bit, do you? Like, let's have a conversation about it together as peers. And I think that's where the power is. The power of reading, just to finish us off.
Very, very quickly, Becky, can I just say,
go for it.
One of the most powerful authors that have had the most impact is a poet called Carl Nova, who came to our school about 18 months ago, who was amazing. And he's so cool, and I can imagine him in a secondary school. He's just far cooler than I can ever imagine being. But he was talking about poetry and rhyme and books, and he had my year 6 boys literally eating out the palm of his hands, and he was so, I mean, the queue was out of the door to have. I had these year 6 boys who who you would say was somebody who wasn't keen on reading, queuing for an hour to get their poetry book signed by Carl Nova, and they still talk about now. So if I'm talking about, like, maybe somebody could get into secondary school to reinvigorate reading, or it's just anything, as a kind of poet doing poetry slam and all of those kind of things. He's just great. We loved him. We thought he was brilliant.
Absolutely. And that kind of, you know, brings home the point that it's about the role models, isn't it? It's about children being able to see people who look and sound like them, for one thing, you know, for that representation, you know, side, talking about books and being passionate about books so that they feel inspired. So yeah, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. Someone's just said, I work at Speakers for Schools and we run National Team Book Club with Penguin. Fabulous, an online book club for 11 plus with author Q&A. So Fabs, if you want any people to get involved, go for it. It was Carl Nova was the poet Kat was referencing. Oh, thanks, Kat. Fabulous. All right, well, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Becky to wrap up tonight's session, but thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Becky, and thank you to Jake and Chris and Kat and Debbie. You've been incredible and so inspiring. Thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. We've had lots of links in the chat, useful things. I've got a few sort of other resources on our website related to Reading for Pleasure that I'll share with you as well in an email after this, so keep an eye out for that. I'll bundle everything together for you. And just before I let you go, the English Association can only do what it does because of its amazing members. So please do consider joining us and being part of our community and helping us to promote the teaching, reading, learning and enjoyment of English. We would love to count you as a member. So thank you, everybody, and I will hopefully see you again soon. Thank you.